Hey folks, you're listening to the Java Easily podcast, episode number 14.
Java Easy. News, tutorials, tips. Everything you need to know as a beginner Java developer.
Hi there, welcome back to the Java Easily podcast. Thanks for returning, it's good to have you here. Now, in the last episode, we looked at how an IDE makes coding easier, which is its primary function. In this episode, we're going to look at the second aspect to IDEs, which is how it makes for an awesome developer experience. So, before we kick off into this episode, if you're new to Java and need a helping hand, you can grab our free starter kit. Just go to javaeasily.com and you'll be able to grab it over there. It's a super helpful guide designed for complete beginners, and it's going to get you up and running with Java in the shortest time possible. But anyway, on with the episode. So, the second thing that an IDE gives you is it makes the programming lifecycle easier. It gives you a more easier out-of-the-box development process. Okay, so what do we mean by this? Well, you don't have to do the heavy lifting anymore with an IDE. So you don't need to use the command line tools that you normally would have to use if you didn't have an IDE. So for example, you use Javac or Javac, whatever you want to call it, to compile the Java source code down into bytecode. Then you have the JVM, or the Java Virtual Machine, which is invoked with the Java command line tool, where you pass the fully qualified class name of the class whose main method you want to execute, which kicks off the whole program. And optionally, usually, you have to also supply a class path there, which is a collection of all the different jar files which contain all of the different classes that particular program has to use. That can get pretty complex pretty quickly, especially as well when you're considering that Java packages, you also need to make sure that the class in a specific package also has a folder structure which mirrors that package as well. In fact, when I first started out with Java, we didn't have IDEs, and you'd actually have to make the package structure yourself. So if you had, for example, com.javaeasily.utils as a package name, you'd actually have to do a make dir to make the directory for com, then cd into com, make directory for Java Easily, and cd into that, make directory for utils. You could also just do make dir -p and then put the full path in. But the fact is you'd have to create these by hand. And when you're having to do all of these things and get used to the platform tools, the command line tools, doing a lot of these kind of things manually, it's very error prone, it's very tedious. And the nice thing about an IDE is you don't have to worry about that at all. You basically just type the code in, right click the main method, go to run, and it runs it. You want to create a new package, you just right click in the project structure, name the package that you want to create, and it creates all of the folders for you. You want to create a class in there, you right click, create a new class or interface or enum or whatever, type the name of the class that you're creating, boom, there it is in the IDE. And all the while you're doing this, the IDE is compiling the code for you as you go along, highlighting any errors. For example, Eclipse, as you're actually writing the code itself, you're going to have a problems view in the lower part of the screen, which will show you all the compilation errors. It tells you IDE does it a little bit differently. In the right-hand kind of scroll bar that you've got, you'll see a red line where there's issues with the program code, allowing you to jump to different portions of code which contain errors, that kind of thing. But the main point is you've got all of this completely out of the box for you, So at this point now, all you're really concerned with is writing the code in the best possible way. And we've already seen that the IDE can give you the tools to do that very effectively at whatever level of programming you are. So if you're not up to refactoring just yet, that's okay. You're just focusing on syntax highlighting or whatever. That's fine. You're just getting the value at that level. But as you get more experienced and more advanced, you start to tap into more of these features of an IDE, which make it a really value-add proposition from the point of view of the developer experience. In other words, how it actually feels to be a developer and how it feels from day to day to actually develop the code that you're paid to write. And the developer experience is so important. It really is. And it's actually bigger than IDEs and how you work with an IDE. There's a whole heap of stuff around, basically how good you feel as a developer. How good you feel as a developer, that's really, to me, what the developer experience is about. And if you have the right tools for the job, and if you have good processes surrounding it, then you become very productive, you can cut code very quickly, you can make changes very quickly to a code base that makes you much more responsive to business requirements and what the business need. In turn, the business start to completely sing your praises, management start to see how good you are and all this kind of stuff, and all of that kind of like as a vortex, as a bit of a grouping of good things that's happening to you personally as a developer. That's a great developer experience to have. So yeah, developer experience, very important, and an IDE, for me, is the key contributor to that particular aspect of being a Java software engineer. Now, in addition to being able to just run the programs that you write or to run your Java code, you can also debug it as well, which is nice. So in an IDE, it allows you to basically debug a Java program. And with this, again, you've got a whole set of tools that enable you to do that. Debugging, if you're not familiar, is where you can like run the program or run your application in slow motion, line by line. So as you so-called step through the code, line by line, You can see what's happening to the variables that you've declared, what values they take, how those values change as you go from line to line. You can then, when you encounter a method call, you can then what's known as jump into that method. And if you can visualize this inside your head, this now means that you're stepping through the lines of that method itself. So just like we spoke about this notion of extract method, so we had a loop, we had 5 lines of code, which we thought, you know what, we'll just put that out into a separate method. So in this case here, as we're debugging, maybe now we've been debugging through the for loop, going through iterations of the for loop, stepping through line by line, and when we get to the end of the loop, then the IDE takes us back to the start of the loop again. We go through the loop, and once again it takes us back to the start of the loop. But during the course of this loop, we have the option to step into that method. So now in the IDE, when we step into that method, we're now going through just those 5 lines. And again, we can see what's happening to the variables, what's happening to the program state, what's happening to any objects you've got on a heap, and that kind of stuff, which you can look at with watches and that kind of thing, which allow you to monitor what's happening to individual variables that aren't explicitly in the scope of that method. But we don't need to go into that too much, but just know that, again, it's another facility which the IDE is giving you, which is this ability to be able to step through the code at your own pace, at your own time, make the observations that you find interesting, that you find insightful to you, and whatever you want to get out of the so-called debug session, whether you're troubleshooting why this particular piece of code is going wrong, or you're trying to understand how this particular piece of code works, or you're trying to get an understanding of how a couple of components work together and how they communicate together, all this kind of stuff. It's entirely down to you as a programmer, how you step through the code and how you arrange your debugging session to be able to track down these kind of things. And you can do that by judicious use of different breakpoints. These are basically lines in the code. They don't have to be lines, but there can be lines in the code, for example, where you want the debugger to stop automatically. So that's kind of like pausing the program at that point. And then and there you can take a snapshot and say, okay, well, this is what's happening with these variables and so on and so forth. You also have conditional breakpoints as well, where it won't just stop blindly on that particular line, but it will stop in accordance to a given condition for that line. So for example, suppose you have a loop which loops around 1,000 times. You might be interested, for whatever reason, on the 85th iteration of that loop. It's highly unlikely, but suppose you are. Then it's quite easy. You can create a breakpoint inside the loop, but then you can right-click the breakpoint and attach a so-called conditional expression to make that breakpoint into a conditional breakpoint. And you can say n equals 85 or whatever I said. And then therefore, when you replay the program, it will go through the loop 84 times. On the 85th time, it will then break at that loop for you. Obviously, that can be different if it's 0 indexed or whatever, but you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. So you can just imagine how powerful a debugger is in terms of understanding the code, this code comprehension, and again, this enhancement of the developer experience. So that's the second point that IDEs give you. So we've seen that it makes coding easier. It gives us a great out-of-the-box developer experience. Now in the last part of this series, in the next episode, we're going to drill down into the third most important aspect of what IDEs give you, and that's how they act as an absolute powerhouse for analysing code and letting you see what's happening in the design super fast. But as for now, that about wraps it up for this episode. All that remains to say is thanks for listening, I hope that was helpful, and have a great day ahead.